Brianna Targaryen never liked the sound of her own last name. To most people on Wall Street, Targaryen meant power, a dynasty of old-money African-American bankers who had silently influenced American finance for over a century. Targaryen Bank, fiercely private, ruthlessly efficient, untouchable. But to Brianna, that name meant walls, expectations, and a life scheduled down to the minute by advisors, bodyguards, and a father who loved her the only way he knew how, by surrounding her with iron. The world saw a miracle heiress. She felt like a prisoner with a crown. 3 years ago, at 22, she ran. She didn't take diamonds, didn't take bodyguards, didn't take her black cards. She took cash she'd saved since childhood, a second-hand phone, and a cheap wig. She cut her name down to one syllable, Bree, and breathed for the first time in her life. New York City swallowed her up like a tide. For the first time, she wasn't the Targaryen heir. She was just another girl trying to pay rent. She got a job delivering packages, riding an old electric bike through midtown traffic. She learned the weight of rain on her jacket, the sting of cold mornings, the pleasure of choosing her own breakfast, her own clothes, her own life. Freedom tasted imperfect, raw and honest. She loved it. Until Halloween. She never remembered the moment of the crash. 1 second she was turning onto Route 5 behind a reckless taxi. The next, there was screeching metal, a spin of headlights, then blackness. When she woke in a small clinic, not even a proper hospital, her vision was blurry, her chest hurt, and the first face she saw leaning over her was Marcus Visor. Brown eyes, a warm smile, a cheap hoodie. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice soft in the dim light. "I pulled you out. You're lucky." She believed him. She didn't know yet that Marcus had only been the person to reach her stretcher first, not the one who'd saved her. But the lie fell so naturally from his lips that even he began to believe it. And Bree, lonely, terrified, stripped of her identity, fell into gratitude. Gratitude blurred into affection. Affection into love. A normal man loving a normal girl. Wasn't this exactly the life she'd run away to find? Marcus was ambitious, persistent, always talking about his startup, his lack of investors, his dream of finally breaking through. Bree, desperate to feel useful and wanting to repay him, used her hidden emergency funds money untraceable to Targaryen accounts to help him quietly. She rented him office space under a fake name, paid overdue bills, and connected him with clients using disposable phones and anonymous emails. She believed she was building a future with him. She told herself he cared. She ignored the way he sometimes treated her like an accessory. She ignored how he always asked for more money, more time, more favors, never noticing how she flinched when he joked about rich girls being useless. She ignored the way he looked around restaurants before holding her hand as if checking who might see them. Love makes fools of the wise and the wounded alike. The day he proposed felt like a victory over her past. It was simple, cheap ring, small rooftop city lights flickering below. She didn't need glamour. She thought she needed him. She didn't know the proposal wasn't love, it was strategy. Marcus's startup was failing. Investors were pulling out. He planned to squeeze her for one last amount of money and then move on. It wasn't until the engagement party organized by him, not her, that the illusion finally shattered. It was held in a luxury hotel lounge, all marble floors and crystal lighting. Bree arrived early, wearing a soft cream dress she'd bought with her own paycheck, proud of how she looked simple, elegant herself. But when she walked in, conversations stopped. People stared, whispered, laughed softly behind hands. She told herself she was imagining it. She wasn't. Marcus arrived with a woman on his arm. Blonde hair, red dress dripping in jewelry. He kissed her cheek before walking into the room. Bree froze. For a moment she thought maybe this was a joke. A misunderstanding. Maybe the woman was his cousin, his colleague, anyone but ladies and gentlemen. Marcus said loudly, tapping a champagne glass. Meet Madison Hale, my fiancé. The laughter that followed hit Bree like a slap. She heard someone whisper, I thought he was marrying the delivery girl. Another voice. He traded up. Her lungs tightened. She stepped forward, voice trembling. Marcus! What is this? He looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Disgust mixed with amusement. You actually came? Wow. He chuckled, shaking his head as if she was a child throwing a tantrum. Bree, or whatever your real name is. I don't even care. You didn't seriously believe we were getting married, did you? The room erupted in muffled snickers. But you proposed, she whispered. You told me I told you what you wanted to hear. He shrugged. God, you really thought a guy like me would settle for a nobody? His fiancée Madison curled her arm tighter around him. She looks like she delivers our Amazon packages, she said with a sugary, venomous smile. Awkward. Bree felt her vision blur. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She wanted to scream. She wanted to disappear. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for only the nearest guests to hear, but loud enough to humiliate her. You're a delivery girl, Bri. Poor, dark, invisible. I used you okay for errands, for help, for pity sex when I was lonely. The words sliced deeper than any knife. You should thank me, he added. I made you feel relevant for a while. Bree stiffened nails digging into her palms. 3 years of late-night ramen dinners. 3 years of comforting him through failures. 3 years of believing he saw her wiped out in seconds. You're a monster, she whispered, voice cracking despite her efforts. No, sweetheart, he corrected, tilting Madison's chin up to kiss her. I'm just not into poor girls. Laughter exploded through the room like fireworks. Bree couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened until she thought her ribs might shatter. She turned to leave, humiliation burning her throat, tears stinging her eyes, when Madison called out cheerfully, Wait, aren't you going to congratulate us? Bree froze mid-step. The room watched her like a wounded animal. Something inside her snapped quietly. Not anger, not hatred, but the crushing realization that she had spent 3 years loving a lie. She forced herself to meet Marcus's gaze. I don't recognize you, she said softly, voice trembling but steady. The boy I thought you were died a long time ago. But Marcus, sensing the last embers of her dignity, smirked and delivered the final blow. Baby, I was never that boy. You were just too desperate to see it. Gasps rippled through the room. He had gone too far enough that even some guests exchanged uneasy looks. And still, Marcus pushed further. Let me give you some advice, he said, leaning back smugly. Women like you should know their place. You're not meant to stand beside men like me. You're meant to serve them. A cold, violent stillness swept through Bree. Something inside her cracked, not in the fragile way glass breaks, but in the way a dam collapses, releasing everything it once held back. Rage, shame, grief, betrayal. But underneath all of it, rising like a slow-burning fire, was something sharper resolve. She wouldn't cry. Not here, not for him, not ever again. But as she turned away, feeling hundreds of eyes on her, a new realization twisted in her chest. Worse than all the rest, Marcus hadn't just broken her heart. He had turned the last 3 years of her life into a lie. A lie she had built her future around. A lie she had sacrificed her freedom for. And as she walked toward the exit legs, shaking, vision blurring, she thought bitterly, I left my family to escape cages, only to build one with the wrong man. She didn't yet know that fate was already pulling someone else toward her, Someone who had seen her long before she ever noticed him. Someone who would change everything. But in that moment, Brianna Targaryen, heir to an empire she had abandoned, walked out of the engagement party with her heart in ruins, and the first spark of a destiny far greater than the one she had tried to run from. Brianna didn't remember when her feet stopped walking. She only remembered the way her wrist burned from the guard's grip and the raw heat behind her eyes that she refused to let fall as tears. The humiliation still echoed in her ears, Marcus's voice ringing like a taunt she couldn't outrun. She tasted metal anger and shame on her tongue, and all she wanted was to slip out the hotel doors and let the night swallow her whole. But the world rarely granted mercy when a heart was breaking. As she stumbled forward, one of the guards yanked her harder, impatient, muttering something under his breath about drama queens. She barely heard him. Her thoughts were a storm, wild, incoherent, painful. She didn't even notice the man standing in her path until she ran straight into him. A hand, large, warm, startlingly steady, closed around her forearm, stopping her fall with effortless strength. "That's enough," a man's voice said, low and calm, but threaded with something cold. The guard jerked back, as if scalded, instinctively straightening to attention. Brianna blinked, dazed, and lifted her gaze only to find herself staring into a pair of gray eyes she knew she had never seen before, yet felt as though she should have. They were the color of winter light, reflecting off skyscraper glass, unforgiving, sharp, but with an undertone of quiet, controlled intensity. The man towered over her, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been sculpted onto him. His hair, brown with hints of gold, was swept back with careless confidence, and he wore black sunglasses even indoors, a silent declaration that he had no need to explain himself to anyone. But it wasn't his appearance that froze her breath. It was the way he was looking at her, as if he had been waiting for her, as if her collapse in front of him mattered. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice dropping into something gentler, something startlingly human beneath the icy exterior. Brianna swallowed hard, unable to form an answer. No one had asked her that in months. Certainly not tonight. Before she could respond, a ripple of murmurs spread across the room like a wave moving toward them. People were whispering, turning, recognizing the contours of his silhouette. The guard who'd shoved her earlier stepped back, fear flickering faintly across his face. "Mr. Stark," he managed. The name hit Bree like a quiet explosion. Stark. As in Stark Capital. As in the youngest billionaire in America. As in the man whose face never appeared at public events, who conducted deals so large the stock market seemed to tilt under his will. But what was he doing here, at Marcus's ridiculous engagement stunt? Why was he touching her, shielding her? She opened her mouth to apologize, to pull away, to do anything except stand there trembling like a fool. But the words didn't come. The man, James Stark, if the guard was correct, turned his head toward Marcus. And the shift in his expression, it was like the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He released Bree's arm gently, as though afraid of hurting her, and stepped forward with the slow, unhurried stride of someone who knew every eye was glued to him and didn't care. Marcus had already noticed him now, and confusion twisted his features. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, though the bravado in his voice was thinning. He glanced toward his guests, expecting support, but all he found was uncertainty. Nobody wanted to misjudge the situation when James Stark was involved. James didn't look at Marcus at first. He kept his gaze on Bree, scanning her expression, her posture, the raw redness around her eyes, as if studying every fracture in her heart and quietly memorizing it. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but sharp enough to cut bone. A man who belittles the woman he used for convenience. He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing behind the glasses. He doesn't get to call himself a businessman, only a coward. A hush fell so deep, it felt like the chandeliers were listening. Marcus started laughing too loudly, too desperately. Who do you think you are, man? Showing up here like some kind of hero. He gestured mockingly toward Bree. What's this? You swooping in to defend the delivery girl. Cute. Bree flinched as heads turned toward her again, but James didn't waver. Instead, he finally removed his sunglasses. The gesture was simple, almost lazy, but the effect was seismic. Conversations died mid-breath. Even the hotel's security froze, because behind those lenses were the unmistakable eyes of a man everyone had seen on magazine covers, but never in person, cold, exquisite, unreadable. The room inhaled collectively. I don't care who you think she is, James said, but I know exactly who you are. Marcus faltered. And who exactly are you? James Stark, he answered quietly, as if reciting a fact too dull to raise his voice for. Gasps broke out. Someone dropped a drink. The air seemed to thicken with awe and confusion. And then, James said the words that stopped Bree's heart altogether. And she, he declared, pointing to Bree without hesitation, is my wife. Silence. Real silence. The kind that sucks the oxygen out of lungs and freezes every muscle in place. Bree couldn't move. She couldn't think. The world, still bright with the sting of humiliation seconds ago, blurred into a haze of disbelief. Wife. What was he talking about? Who was this man? Why was he inserting himself into her wreckage? Marcus's face went pale, then purple, then twisted in a mix of outrage and panic. You're... what? My wife, James repeated, this time louder, firmer, like he was giving a press statement. As of today. A storm of whispers erupted, and then impossibly eyes turned to Bree, waiting, questioning, judging. Her heart thrashed inside her chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. She didn't even know him. She'd never spoken to him before tonight. She should deny it, clear the misunderstanding, pull away from this madness. But something in James Stark's gaze held her in place, a quiet promise, an unexpected lifeline thrown into waters she had been drowning in just moments before. For the first time that night, she didn't see pity in a man's eyes. She saw certainty, protection, fury on her behalf. She saw someone stepping between her and the world, not because he wanted something from her, not because he thought she was weak, but because he believed she deserved better than what she'd endured. Her pulse hammered wildly, her breath trembling on her lips. She should say no. She should walk away. She should run. Instead, her throat tightened, her lips parted, and a single stunned word slipped out before she could stop it. Okay. James turned his head slightly, acknowledging her answer, with a single blink, as if he had never expected anything else, as if the universe was simply falling into alignment. Marcus gagged on his own shock. Are you insane? He sputtered. You married to her? Yes, James said calmly. To her? Madison scoffed, tossing her hair. This is ridiculous. She doesn't even look like she belongs in the same tax bracket as careful, James murmured without looking at her. It wasn't a threat. It didn't need to be. The entire room felt the warning in their bones. Then, without asking permission, without hesitation, James stepped closer to Bree and placed a slow, deliberate hand on her lower back. The touch was light, respectful, but it sent electric heat sliding up her spine. He leaned in just enough for only her to hear. You're not alone anymore, he murmured, voice barely above a breath. She exhaled shakily. She didn't understand anything about him. She didn't know why he was here, why he had intervened, or what he expected from her now. But for the first time since the night began, she didn't feel like she was falling apart. She felt anchored, protected, seen. A warmth spread in her chest, unexpected and terrifying. Before she could process it more, hotel security appeared this time with far more caution than before. One of them stammered, "Mr. Stark, is there a problem?" James didn't even turn toward them. "There was," he said, "but not anymore." Marcus, trembling with rage, jabbed a finger toward Bry. "You can't just show up and claim her like some trophy. She's nothing. She is my wife." James repeated each word clean and unshakable. "And if you insult her again, Marcus, you'll learn how quickly a man can lose everything he thought was secure." A hush fell again. It wasn't a threat. It was a forecast. Marcus stumbled backward, face drained of confidence. Madison clutched his arms, suddenly far less smug. Bree felt dizzy. Her thoughts tangled between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. She glanced at James, searching his expression for any sign of mockery or manipulation. But all she found was a strange intensity, like he was studying every crack in the armor she'd tried to hold together. "Why? Why would you do this?" she whispered, barely audible. James didn't smile. He didn't soften. His face remained impossibly serene. "Because someone needed to," he said simply. It wasn't the answer she expected, but it was the one she needed. And as the room watched them in stunned silence, Brianna Targaryen, still grieving the destruction of her old life, felt the first subtle shift toward a new one, written by a man whose name could bend markets, and whose touch had just changed hers. Their marriage had begun as a declaration spoken in a moment of chaos and pride, but in the quiet space between their shared breath, she sensed something else. Destiny. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The kind that rewrites everything. And this was only the beginning. The elevator ride to James Stark's penthouse felt like a slow ascent into another universe. Brianna had never been inside a luxury building that wasn't part of a delivery route. Now, the mirrored walls reflected an image she barely recognized herself, standing beside the most enigmatic man in American finance, wearing a cheap dress stained with humiliation, and a ring she wasn't sure existed. Yet James stood silently, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but alert, as if he was guarding something fragile, something he feared might shatter if the world breathed too loudly. Her. The doors opened to a private foyer where motion sensor lights glowed like candle flames. The penthouse itself unfurled before her expansive windows, revealing Manhattan glittering below like an electric constellation. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something warm, like vanilla bourbon. But though everything screamed wealth, the atmosphere around him felt strangely gentle. James stepped aside, letting her enter first as though she wasn't the intruder in his world, but the owner. "You can stay in the guest suite," he said, voice quiet, unreadable. "It's down the hall to the right. No one will disturb you here." She expected him to follow her to fill the space with instructions or expectations, or at least the pretense of a man staking a claim on his wife. But he remained near the doorway, hands clasped loosely behind his back, watching her with a type of careful distance she hadn't experienced before. A respectful distance, as if he wanted her to feel safe, not cornered. It unsettled her how much that mattered. Over the next week, a strange rhythm formed between them. Not quite domestic, not quite strangers. Every morning she woke to the smell of breakfast, already made scrambled eggs, toast, sometimes pancakes. Always simple, always familiar. She didn't realize until days later that the eggs were cage-free. The butter was imported. The maple syrup was aged in specialty barrels, ingredients disguised with plain packaging, so she wouldn't feel uncomfortable. She caught him once, throwing out the original containers and stuffing the ingredients into grocery store jars. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard her footsteps, eyes widening just slightly, before he cleared his throat and muttered, "I read somewhere that this brand tastes better." It was an obvious lie and an unnecessary one. She didn't call him out on it. She didn't know how to tell him that kindness like his made her chest ache with a strange, unfamiliar heat. And it wasn't just the food. The penthouse began to change subtly at first. A soft throw blanket appeared on the couch, the exact mustard yellow shade she loved. A low bookshelf began to fill with novels she had mentioned once in passing. The stiff, angular furniture softened, replaced with pieces that were warm-toned, round-edged, comfortable. James pretended none of it was intentional. Interior design said the place needed updating. "I thought you lived alone." "They update things anyway." Another obvious lie. But as she watched him move around the penthouse, silent, composed, polite, she began to wonder if he was attempting something he'd never had to attempt before. Making space for another person. Making space for her. He spent his days on the phone or in the study, speaking in low, controlled tones that made the air vibrate with quiet authority. She tried not to eavesdrop, but the glimpses she caught were enough to understand the scale of the world he navigated: multi-billion-dollar negotiations, political tensions, global markets, bending around his decisions. And yet he always emerged from the study at dusk, rolled-up sleeves exposing strong forearms, hair slightly tousled eyes, searching for her with something she couldn't describe, something like concern, or maybe a question he didn't know how to ask. He never touched her without permission, not even a brush of fingers at the dining table, not even an accidental graze when passing her in the hallway. A man with that much power choosing restraint felt more intimate than any kiss she'd shared with Marcus. It made her wonder what kind of life James Stark had lived for restraint to become his language of affection. Still, tension simmered between them. They were married on paper, but the silence between them sometimes felt too heavy, too charged, too full of possibilities neither dared name. And Bree, who had always been so good at reading people's intentions, felt completely disarmed by the fact she could not decipher his. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, she found herself unable to bear the weight of the unspoken between them. He had cooked pasta simple creamy with mushrooms. Or rather, what she thought were mushrooms. She later found the packaging of imported truffles in the trash, hastily wrapped in plain brown paper. She confronted him not angrily, not cautiously, but with genuine bewilderment. "James," she said, leaning against the counter as he washed dishes. "Why pretend things are cheap? Why lie about ingredients or furniture or anything?" He froze a dish still in his hand. "I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable," he said without turning. "We barely know each other." "Exactly," she insisted softly. "So why care this much?" When he finally looked at her, the veneer of cold neutrality cracked just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath it. There was something vulnerable in his gaze, though he tried to hide it. "You look like someone who hasn't been cared for in a long time," he said. "I didn't want to overwhelm you." The admission stole her breath. It would have been easier if he'd lied, if he'd said he didn't care, if he had kept pretending this was a transaction, a public statement, a strategic alliance. But the truth had weight, and that weight pressed against her heart until it ached. Over the next few days, she found herself seeking him out, not for reassurance, but because she genuinely felt safe around him. Something she hadn't felt since before her mother died, before her father built walls around her instead of holding her hand. She noticed how James's eyes softened when she laughed, even if he tried to hide it. How he stood a little closer when they walked on the rooftop balcony. How he paid attention to the things she didn't say. And that scared her. Because she'd fallen for the wrong man once. She'd poured her love into a hollow shape carved by manipulation. She couldn't afford to misjudge James Stark. But feelings don't care about logic. One night, unable to sleep, she stepped onto the balcony. The wind was cool, the city glowing beneath, like an ocean of stars. James was already out there, leaning over the railing, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened. He looked almost human like this, almost breakable. She didn't know how long she stood there before he noticed her. His voice was soft. "Can't sleep, no." She approached him slowly, unsure if she was crossing a boundary. I don't sleep much," he said, eyes still on the skyline. "Too much noise in my head." "Me too," she admitted. "Different noise, maybe, but still noise." He turned then, not fully but enough to face her. Enough for his gaze to pin her gently in place. "Bree." He said her name sounding different on his tongue. Warmer, heavier. "If this arrangement makes you uncomfortable, if you feel trapped, you can leave. Anytime." His voice didn't waver, but something in it trembled in silence. She didn't know why the thought of leaving made her chest tighten painfully. "I don't want to leave," she whispered, before she could stop herself. And for the first time since they met, she saw James lose control of his expression. His inhale was sharp. His jaw relaxed just slightly. His eyes softened. Slow, warm, almost tender. "Brianna." He murmured her full name. A caress. "Why did you say yes? That night?" She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe because I needed someone to choose me when I couldn't choose myself." His breath caught. The distance between them suddenly felt charged, heavy, electric. And then she asked the question that had haunted her since the night he called her his wife. "Why did you want to marry me?" The city hummed below them, but the world between them stilled. James didn't hesitate. He didn't rehearse. He didn't lie. "Because for the first time in my life," he said, voice deep, raw, honest, "I wanted to protect someone." The confession hit her like a pulse of heat sinking into her bones, melting the last of her defenses. She didn't know whether she wanted to cry or step into him or run. She only knew that something irreversible shifted inside her. And he felt it too. Their eyes held, neither looking away, neither breathing fully. Something unnamed, something dangerous, tender, inevitable bloomed between them. A fake marriage, yes. But feelings, those were becoming real, too real. And Brianna, whose life had been defined by masks and lies, suddenly feared the truth more than anything. Because it wasn't James she was afraid of. It was how much she was beginning to want him. And destiny, once awakened, rarely lets go. The ballroom of the Hudson Crown Hotel glittered like a palace carved from money. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over a sea of designer suits, polished shoes, and people who loved the scent of power more than the air itself. Tonight's event, the national auction for the largest real estate development in America, was a battlefield disguised as a gala. Every billionaire magnate and political titan in the country fought for a seat close to the stage. Deals worth billions were whispered behind champagne glasses. Eyes flickered with hunger and calculation. And into that glittering arena walked Brianna and James Stark. The moment they entered, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Some people straightened up, as if summoned to attention. Others whispered behind hands, trying to determine whether the rumors were true. Had James Stark really married a woman? No one knew. Bree walked beside him, her hand resting lightly in the crook of his arm. She wore a sleek black gown that hugged her silhouette and made her look every bit the equal of the empire of glass and steel above them. Yet inside her stomach churned. It wasn't the crowd or the lights, or the fact that she was walking into a room where her past waited with sharp teeth. It was the invisible thread between her and James, the tension charged with heat and confusion ever since the night on the balcony when he'd told her he wanted to protect her. She still felt the echo of that confession inside her ribs. She still didn't know what to do with it. James felt her pulse beneath his fingertips, felt the way she tried to quiet her breathing. He leaned slightly closer, not touching, not pressing, but enough for her to feel the steadiness of him. A silent reassurance. "You're not alone." She inhaled slowly. And then she saw Marcus. He stood near the stage laughing with that same smug curl of his lips, Madison the faux heiress clinging to his arm like a trophy on display. The bitterness of memory hit Bree like a slap, but she kept her chin up. She wasn't the same woman who walked out of his engagement party in pieces. She wasn't broken anymore. She wasn't alone. Yet still the sting of what he had done clung to her like a bruise. Madison saw them first, her perfectly glossed mouth twisted into a smirk. "Oh, look what the wind blew back in," she purred loudly, making sure the crowd heard. The little delivery girl who thought she could marry up. Marcus snickered, sipping champagne. "Must be exhausting pretending to belong here, Bree. Wearing a dress you can't afford, clinging to a man you don't deserve." Bree's heart thudded painfully, but before their words could burrow deeper, James shifted. One small movement. He placed his hand on the small of her back, steady and warm, a quiet barrier between her and the cruelty thrown at her. "Don't respond," he murmured, so only she could hear. "Their noise isn't worth your breath." The simple sentence wrapped around her chest like armor. She straightened, refusing to let Marcus see her flinch. But Marcus wasn't done. He raised his voice, projecting to the cluster of investors nearby. "I mean, come on," he gloated. "We all know how she got into this room. Riding the coattails of men is her specialty." Laughter rippled through the nearest crowd. Bree swallowed, her throat tightening, but James stepped forward, placing himself fully between her and Marcus. And when he finally spoke, the room fell quiet in a single heartbeat. "Is that what you think?" His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Authority clung to every syllable, silencing the space around them. Marcus forced out a laugh. "What? You're defending her again? Why, she's nothing but—" He didn't get to finish. James walked past him, up onto the stage, and the entire ballroom followed him with their eyes. The auctioneer, flustered, stepped aside. Members of the press adjusted their cameras, suddenly alert. James removed a black metal card from his suit jacket. The Stark Chairman card. A myth within Wall Street, a card no one had ever seen whispered about in private circles, rumored to belong only to the true owner of Stark Capital. No limits, no ceilings, no thresholds. Madison gasped. Marcus's smirk cracked. The crowd leaned forward collectively as James slid the card into the verification machine. The screen flickered. Then words appeared, sharp, undeniable, devastating. "Balance verified, over $120 billion. The room froze in perfect silence. Madison choked on her drink. Marcus staggered as if someone had knocked the breath out of him. Investors whispered in awe. Someone dropped their phone. Bree felt the shock roll across the room like an earthquake. But what shocked her more was the way James turned to her. Slowly, deliberately, with a gentleness that didn't match the steel he had shown a moment before. He extended his hand, not demanding, not performing, but inviting. She walked toward him, every step grounding her, until she reached his side. He rested his hand on her waist, drawing her subtly into his space, shielding her from every mocking gaze, as if she were the center of a universe only he could protect. He leaned close, voice steady and dark with warning. "I don't tolerate anyone," he murmured, eyes locked with Marcus's, "who insults my wife." The word wife vibrated through her like a spark. The room erupted, not in laughter, but in stunned murmurs. Breaths held minds racing to comprehend what they were seeing. Bree felt herself breathe for the first time that night. Truly breathe. James wasn't acting. This wasn't performance. This was conviction. She felt something deep inside her awaken a fierce burning pulse of safety she hadn't felt in years. A pulse of belonging, of being chosen. Marcus finally found his voice, but it trembled, betraying him. This is insane," he stammered, eyes darting. "You can't be serious. She's just—" "Careful," James cut in. Just one word, but it struck like a hammer. Marcus flinched. The rich and powerful shifted uneasily. No one dared a line against James Stark. Not when the Stark chairman card had just declared war on anyone who threatened the woman at his side. The auction resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Investors approached James with new respect, some with fear. But his attention remained tethered to the woman pressed softly against him. And though Bree stood tall, calm, composed inside, she was unraveling. Why does he care this much? Why does he fight for me like this? Who am I to him? She watched the way he navigated the room, measured cold, untouchable to everyone but her. He leaned down once, brushing a whisper against her ear. "Are you all right?" The question caught her off guard. No one ever asked her that at events filled with wealth and cruelty. She nodded, though her chest ached with something warm and unfamiliar. "Yes," she whispered, "because you're here." His expression flickered, something soft, almost vulnerable, flashing beneath the stoic mask before he hid it again. But fate wasn't done with them yet. As the final bids were placed and the room shifted into the cocktail mingling period, a new presence swept into the ballroom like a sudden gust of cold wind. Marcus's father, Richard Visor, a powerful but corrupt developer with a reputation for crushing competitors, strode toward them with 2 lawyers in tow. "Stark," he barked, ignoring Bree entirely. "You're interfering in matters you don't understand." James didn't turn. On the contrary, he replied smoothly, "I understand perfectly." Richard sneered. "That girl," he spat, pointing at Bree, "will ruin you. Her presence here is an embarrassment. My son acted out of charity, entertaining her delusions." Bree stiffened, but James pulled her closer, his arm now firmly around her waist. He turned toward Richard, with the slow, controlled precision of a man preparing a strike. "Let me be absolutely clear," James said, tone low enough that only those closest could hear, but sharp enough to slice through the room. "Your son lost the right to speak about her the day he chose cruelty over decency." Richard bristled. "You're making enemies you can't afford, Stark." James raised an eyebrow, the hint of a cold smile touching his lips. "I'm the wrong man to threaten." The tension crystallized, brittle and dangerous. Bree felt her pulse spike, not from fear, but from the terrifying realization that James wasn't doing this for performance or ego. He was doing this for her, protecting her, claiming her, standing in front of her like a shield made of flame and steel. And the room knew it. Marcus backed away. Madison found someone else to cling to. Richard Visor clenched his jaw, retreating with a glare that promised retaliation. But as he walked away, Bree noticed something off about him. His eyes didn't look at her with simple disdain. They gleamed with recognition. And something darker. Something like knowing. A cold ripple ran through her. She didn't understand it yet. She wouldn't understand for several chapters of her life. But that moment marked the beginning of a new storm. One connected to her past. One connected to secrets she still didn't know. But James's hand tightened around her waist, pulling her closer, grounding her. She looked up. He looked down. The world faded for a heartbeat. "You're safe," he whispered. "As long as I'm here, you're safe." And for the first time since she fled her family years ago, Brianna believed it. She believed him. She believed in him. And destiny, quiet, relentless, tightened its hold around them both. Tonight's battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The ballroom had only just begun to recover from the shock of James's declaration when an even deeper tremor swept through it. Something silent and heavy, like the air tightening before a storm breaks. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses stilled halfway to lips. Even the music faltered, the pianist's fingers slowing as instinct whispered danger. At first, no one knew what caused the shift. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened. Not gently, not politely. They swung wide as if the building itself had decided to bow. A line of black armored security agents filed in, moving with the precision of a private military. The lighting in the room dimmed as shadows from a motorcade outside spilled across the marble floor. And then they saw them sleek black limousines stretching along the entrance like a procession meant for royalty. Gasps rippled. Someone muttered a curse. Someone else whispered a name with trembling reverence. But it wasn't until the final limousine door opened that the entire hall collectively forgot how to breathe. Duke David Targaryen stepped out. Tall, immaculate, power wrapped around him like a second skin. His presence alone didn't just command attention, it demanded obedience. He was the kind of man the nation feared to cross, founder of Targaryen Bank, controller of the country's silent financial arteries, a king without a crown whose decisions shaped economies while politicians merely watched. A man whose identity had always remained an enigma behind tinted windows, private jets, and boardrooms only the untouchable elite ever entered. And he was here. For someone. For her. The false heiress Marlene, with her borrowed diamonds and stolen confidence, froze mid-pose, her lips still parted from the proclamation she had just made. Moments ago, she stood smugly before the cameras, announcing herself as Lady Targaryen. She was basking in the awe and fear that followed. But now she withered, every color drained from her face. Because Duke Targaryen wasn't looking at her, not even for a second. His gaze cut past the crowd, past the golden stage, past the glittering towers of champagne, and landed directly on Brianna. Bree felt it before she saw it, an instinctual shiver, the kind she remembered from childhood, whenever the air shifted in a way only she and her father could sense. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. She forgot the room. She forgot that James was standing beside her, with his arms still warm around her waist. All she felt was that familiar wave of both fear and love. Fear of the man who once caged her life in wealth and expectations, and love for the father who had raised her alone after her mother died, breaking himself in half to fill the role of two parents. He walked toward her, each step heavy with the authority of an empire. Marcus stumbled backward and fell to his knees without meaning to. Investors stepped aside instinctively. Even James straightened, not out of fear, but out of respect for a man whose influence reached farther than borders. But Bree felt something else bloom inside her. Something she hadn't expected. Relief. Because for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't alone on the battlefield. Her father stopped in front of her. Silence strangled the entire ballroom. No one dared make a sound. Then, in a voice so deep and familiar, it shook her chest, he said, My daughter. The world fell away. Bree couldn't move. She felt herself pulled back into memories, the smell of his cologne, when he hugged her after nightmares, the warmth of his voice, when he read her bedtime stories despite being exhausted from meetings, the silent ache in his eyes the day she ran away because she couldn't bear the weight of the future chosen for her. Dad. The word broke out of her before she could stop it. Duke Targaryen's stern expression softened for the briefest moment, not enough for the crowd to see, but enough for her to feel. Finally, he murmured, stepping closer, "You let me find you." The crowd erupted into whispers behind gloved hands. Some gasped. Others bowed their heads instinctively. Even members of Congress who were present abruptly straightened, their bravado dissolving. Because the truth was undeniable now. The woman they mocked, laughed at, belittled, she was the true heiress of Targaryen Bank. The most powerful private bank in the country. The real Lady Targaryen. And she had been standing among them the entire time, dressed simply, quietly, lovingly claimed by the young billionaire at her side. Marlene collapsed into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. Marcus remained frozen on his knees, terror widening his eyes. Every insult he had hurled at her now hung in the air, ready to choke him. Meanwhile, James stayed still, watching father and daughter with a careful, unreadable gaze. The Duke finally turned his attention to James. The stare between them was electric. One man who controlled the arteries of the nation's wealth, and one man who controlled the empire of its innovation. Their power collided in silence. Bree felt her heart squeeze in her chest. She had never wanted these worlds to meet. She had hidden herself precisely because she feared what would happen if the man she loved ever stood face to face with the man who owned half the financial systems in the country. But now there was no going back. Her father studied James, every stoic line of his posture, every unspoken promise in his stance, every quiet touch of reassurance he offered Bree without drawing attention. And then the corners of Duke Targaryen's mouth lifted, not in arrogance, but in something far rarer. Approval. "You chose well," he said quietly, the words dipping into warmth, even though his tone remained regal. Bree's breath caught. She had always feared he would disapprove of any man she brought home. No one would ever be good enough for the daughter he had cherished so fiercely he drove her away by accident. But James Stark was not any man. He was the only one who had ever stood unafraid between her and the world. James inclined his head respectfully, but the grip he kept around Bree's waist did not loosen. If anything, he drew her closer in a subtle gesture that said, "She's mine to protect, and I will never step aside." Her father noticed, and instead of bristling, he nodded once, as if relieved. The room exploded not into chaos, but into a thunder of realization. The power shift was seismic. Everyone saw it now. James Stark and Brianna Targaryen together were not just wealthy. They were unstoppable. Marcus crawled forward on his knees, voice trembling. "Lady Targaryen, please, I didn't know." Bree turned slightly, watching him through eyes that finally understood their own strength. She felt James beside her, steady and silent, a wall of protection she could lean on. But she didn't need him to speak for her now. Not tonight. Not with her father standing proudly at her side. She faced Marcus fully. The man she once loved. The man who had broken her so easily because she had believed he'd saved her life. The man who had never deserved even a moment of her heart. "You knew exactly who I was," she said softly. "You just never saw my worth." Marcus's face crumpled. Before he could respond, Marlene, still shaking, broke down completely. "I swear I didn't mean to impersonate, please, Duke Targaryen, But Duke Targaryen raised one hand, and his security agents stepped forward in a wave of silent menace. Neither of them dared speak again. But Bree wasn't looking at them anymore. She was looking at her father, and then at James. And in that moment, surrounded by cameras and investors and enemies, she realized something with painful clarity. This was the first time she didn't feel like a runaway anymore. Her father reached out and touched her cheek gently, and something inside her heart broke open. She stepped into his embrace, his arms wrapped around her, strong and trembling ever so slightly, proof that even giants could fear losing the people they loved most. When he finally released her, she turned toward James almost without thinking. He opened his arms just slightly, not assuming, not possessive, just available. Waiting. And she went to him. She melted into his chest, her face buried in the scent of cedar and quiet strength. And for the first time since the accident 3 years ago, she felt completely safe. James's hand slid up her back, his palm warm over her spine. His lips brushed her temple, barely a touch, but enough to send a shiver through her. "You're not alone," his embrace whispered. "Not anymore." Cameras flashed. Gasps rippled. The entire ballroom watched as two of the most powerful men in America silently acknowledged each other over the woman standing between them. But Bri didn't hear any of it. All she felt was James. All she heard was her father finally calling her home. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, she didn't have to choose between love and identity. She had both. And something deep inside her whispered that this, James's warmth, her father's approval, the power of her own name, was just the beginning. A beginning that would soon shake the entire country. The sky above Miami glowed the soft gold of late afternoon, the ocean shimmering like silk behind the private cliffside estate James had secured for their wedding. The entire coastline had been locked down by Stark Capital security, every rooftop patrolled by Targaryen agents trained to spot threats from a mile away. It was a ceremony meant to be perfect, not because the world expected perfection, but because Bri finally allowed herself to want it. Want him. Want this future. But perfection has a way of drawing out the darkest corners of the world. And today those corners had names: Marcus Visor and Marlene the imposter, who had tried to steal Bri's identity. They had been silent for weeks, but silence is only ever the inhale before the scream. And as the wedding began, they arrived like a stain on the horizon. Bri didn't see them at first. She was focused on the aisle unfolding before her, a path lined with white orchids, candles flickering in the ocean breeze, 1,000 guests rising to their feet. But her heart was focused on only one thing: the man waiting for her at the altar. James. He stood beneath the arch of flowers with his hands clasped behind his back, expression composed, but eyes. Oh, his eyes softened in a way she had seen only when he looked at her. It was the kind of gaze that steadied her shaking breath, that quieted memories of betrayal and loneliness. The kind that made her wonder how she'd ever survived without him. As she approached, veil trailing behind her like a whisper of stardust, something inside her chest loosened. She had run from her family. She had been humiliated by the man she thought she loved. But every step toward James felt like stitching herself back together. The closer she came, the easier it was to breathe. And when she reached him, he lifted her veil with a touch so gentle it trembled. "You look like trouble," he murmured, voice low enough only she could hear. Her lips curved. "Then you're in danger." "I've been in danger since the day I met you," he replied, eyes warm, and she could hear the unspoken truth beneath the teasing. "Dangerous because losing you would destroy me." The officiant cleared his throat. The guests quieted, and the ceremony began. Vows, spoken beneath the fading sun, a breeze brushing through her curls, as if nature itself wanted to bless them. It was beautiful. It was sacred. And it lasted exactly 8 minutes before the world shattered. A scream cut through the quiet. One sharp, terrified cry from the edge of the ceremony. James's head snapped toward the sound, just as a woman stumbled forward. Marlene clutching what looked like a metal vest with wires spilling out from beneath her jacket. Behind her, Marcus held a small device in his shaking hand, eyes wild with desperation. Bree froze. Guests gasped. Security reacted instantly, but not fast enough to stop the moment that followed. Marlene lifted the vest and screamed, "If we can't be happy, no one here will be either." A dozen cameras flashed. Guests surged back. But Bree didn't move. For a split second, her mind blanked. And then the world snapped into brutal clarity. Marcus's voice cracked through the chaos. "Maybe now you'll notice me. Maybe now everyone will see what you took from me. My company, my life, Marcus." "Don't!" Bree shouted, her voice breaking, instinct driving her forward before she even realized she had moved. And in that impossible, breathless instant, time seemed to slow. Because James, who always calculated every step, who never let emotion dictate action, did something shocking. He moved. Faster than logic. Faster than training. Faster than every bodyguard sprinting toward them. He reached Bree first. He grabbed her waist. He hauled her against him, and he turned his entire body toward the explosive vest. He shielded her completely. "James, no, I'm not losing you," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "Not today. Not ever." The vest blinked, beeped. The device in Marcus's hand flashed red. Gasps turned into screams. But instead of detonating the vest, released a burst of smoke, thick, blinding, harmless. It was a fake bomb, a bluff, a weapon made of cardboard wires and hate. Marlene shrieked in panic as Stark agents tackled her to the ground. Marcus dropped the detonator and tried to run, only to be slammed into the stone tiles by two Targaryen officers whose movements were as fluid as shadows. The entire thing lasted 20 seconds. Maybe less. But for Bree, pressed against James's chest with his arms locked around her, like the world itself was trying to steal her away, it felt like an eternity. When the smoke cleared, silence fell again. Heavy, trembling, terrified. James didn't release her, not even when the last attacker was dragged away in cuffs. Not even when her father appeared beside them, his own security detail in a frenzy. Not even when guests whispered in shock. He held her as though letting go would mean losing her again. Bree's hands were buried in his suit fingers, curled into the fabric with a desperation that mirrored his. She couldn't hear anything but the echo of his voice, raw, unfiltered, spoken like a vow carved into bone. "I'm not losing you." And in that moment, something inside her tilted, shifted, broke open like a dam. Because no one had ever thrown themselves between her and danger. No one had ever chosen her safety above their own. She had always been the defender, the caretaker, the one who carried others. But James had leaped without hesitation. He was willing to die to keep her alive. Her heart still racing, still fragile, fell harder than the moment she first saw him remove his glasses. Fell deeper than the moment he called her my wife in front of the world. Fell completely. When he finally pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes were storm dark. "Are you hurt?" "No," she breathed, her fingers shaking when they brushed his jaw. "Because of you." Relief flashed across his face. A relief so raw, it felt like a confession. She swallowed hard. "James, you could have been killed. It doesn't matter. It matters to me." His breath caught, and for a second, she saw something vulnerable flicker in him, a fracture in the wall he'd built around his emotions. "Bree," he whispered, "I didn't think. I just reacted. You were in front of me and I—" She rested her forehead against his chest, her voice soft but trembling with truth. "You protected me in front of the entire world." He held her tighter. "I will always protect you, even if it costs me everything. The world around them blurred the panicked guests' sirens approaching from the private road, her father barking orders into his comms. But none of it touched the quiet bubble forming around them. For the first time in her life, Bree didn't feel torn between two worlds. She didn't feel like she had to choose between independence and love. Because James wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't trying to own her, change her, cage her. He was trying to keep her alive. He was trying to keep her safe. He chose her when her past tried to kill her. He chose her when the world mocked her. He chose her when she didn't even know how to choose herself. Duke Targaryen approached them, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes softening when he saw his daughter in James's arms. He placed a steady hand on James's shoulder. "You protected what's mine," he said quietly. James met his gaze without flinching. "She's mine too." There was a beat of silence. Then, for the first time in public, Bree's father smiled. Small, approving. "Good," he murmured. "Then we protect her together." Bree closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment, the unity between the two most powerful men in her life, the acceptance she never dared hope for, the realization that she was finally truly surrounded by people who would fight for her instead of against her. She tightened her hold on James's lapel, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I married you out of anger," she confessed. Out of heartbreak, out of spite. He brushed a thumb along her cheek, wiping away the tear she hadn't noticed. And now, she looked up at him, the answer already blooming in her chest like a flame that would never go out. "Now," her voice cracked. "Now I realize I married the only man who never turned his back on me." James's expression shattered beautifully, irrevocably, into something she'd never seen before. Something tender, something dangerous, something like love. And as sirens wailed in the distance and the last of their enemies were dragged away, he kissed her forehead with a promise that deepened the air around them. "Then let this be the last time you ever question what you mean to me." Bree felt her heart surrender completely, because she knew without hesitation, without fear, without doubt, that this man wasn't just her husband. He was her shield, her partner, her choice, and she was his. The Stark family estate in Manhattan was nothing like the sun-kissed cliffs of Miami. It was colder, heavier, a fortress built on legacy, expectation, and the kind of power that moved markets with a whisper. Bree felt its weight the moment she stepped inside with James. The walls were lined with portraits of ancestors whose stern eyes seemed to judge her on sight, their frames dripping in gold, their expressions carved in smug permanence. She wasn't afraid, but she felt something tighten inside her, something instinctive, like walking barefoot across a floor scattered with broken glass. James sensed it. His fingers tightened around hers as he led her into the grand chamber where his family waited. The Council of Starks, as the tabloids called them, though in reality it was simply his parents, his two elder brothers, and several advisors who'd served the family long enough to believe they were part of its bloodline. Bree's nails pressed into her palm as she felt their gazes sweep over her. Curiosity, suspicion, disdain carefully hidden beneath polite smiles. The kind of glances people give at auctions evaluating a painting, not a person. She hated it. But she kept her chin lifted, her composure sharp as silk. James stood at her side, rigid as steel, his jaw set. His mother spoke first, a woman polished to cold perfection, her pearls glistening at her throat like tiny strangled secrets. "James," she said, offering a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we need to discuss your choices." His father stepped forward, more weary than cruel, but stern in that old money way that left little room for softness. "This marriage of yours, son, it complicates things." Bree felt the room tilt, though her expression never wavered. She had known this confrontation would come. She had prepared herself for it. Yet nothing could fully brace her for the next words spoken with gentle cruelty. "A stark heir," his father said slowly, "must marry someone aligned with our future, not someone who brings uncertainty." Uncertainty. The word sliced deeper than insult. It was erasure. It was dismissal. And Bree's heart twisted painfully, not because she believed them, but because she suddenly feared James did. His mother clasped her hands delicately. "We're not asking you to leave her. We're asking you to decide where your loyalty lies." His eldest brother leaned back in his chair, smirking faintly. "Your wife," he said, "or your inheritance." The room went still. Bree felt her heart plummet, her chest tightening with cold panic. They weren't just threatening money, they were threatening his identity, the empire he built, the future he had worked for with ruthless precision since he was practically a child. No one could expect him to throw that away. Not even her. She looked at him, trying to catch his eye, trying to silently tell him he didn't have to choose her over everything he'd ever known. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at his family, his posture straight, his shoulders squared, his expression unreadable. And then he spoke, calmly, quietly, devastatingly. "I choose her." Bree stopped breathing. His mother blinked as if she misheard. His father's frown deepened. His brothers exchanged stunned looks. But James didn't hesitate. He took Bree's hand and brought her forward, placing her directly at his side before facing his family fully. "Without her," he said, voice low but sharp enough to cut marble, "I don't want any of this." Bree's throat closed with emotion. His mother exhaled sharply. "James, don't be dramatic. You've built this company. This legacy means nothing," he interrupted, "if it costs me the one person who's ever believed in me without wanting something in return." Bree's eyes burned. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't dared hope for this. But then he turned to her, and his voice, usually controlled, carefully measured, softened into something unguarded and raw. "You're my family now," he murmured. "The only one I chose." Tears blurred her vision. Not delicate, silent tears, but a rush of overwhelming emotion she couldn't hold back. She stepped into him, cupped his face, and kissed him right there in front of every Stark who had tried to push her out. It was not a polite kiss. It was a vow, a declaration, a claim. And the room, so cold moments before, seemed to tremble with the heat of it. His hands slid to her waist, drawing her closer, as if he needed her to breathe. For a moment, nothing existed. Not the portraits, not the judgments, not the legacy looming over them, only the truth blooming fiercely between them. When they finally broke apart, James kept his forehead against hers, exhaling shakily. She whispered, voice barely steady, "You didn't have to choose me over everything." His thumb brushed her cheek gently. There was never a choice. But peace wasn't won yet. The eldest Stark brother scoffed, stepping forward. "Touching, truly. But you think we'll hand over the family empire to you when your wife is embroiled in scandals, impersonations, attacks, and God knows what else?" Bree's breath stilled. His brother wasn't just being cruel. He was provoking. He wanted her emotional, wanted her defensive, wanted her small. But he didn't know her. He didn't know the woman who'd survived betrayal, false accusations, and assassination attempts. He didn't know the daughter of Duke Targaryen. He didn't know the strategist who could bring a corporation to its knees with a single well-timed piece of evidence. She stepped forward. Her voice cut the air like sharpened velvet. "While you were busy whispering insults, she said I was gathering facts." She opened her clutch, pulled out a folder, and tossed it onto the table. Photos slid across the polished wood. Copies of internal emails, bank transfers, lab reports, poison analyses. A hush fell. James's father paled. His mother gasped softly, and his brothers, especially the eldest, stiffened in visible panic. Bree lifted her chin. The attempt to poison James during the shareholders' gala 2 years ago. What? James turned sharply, eyes darkening with a fury she had never seen before. She swallowed. The cause was masked as a severe allergic reaction. She looked directly at his eldest brother. But it wasn't. Advisors grabbed the papers with trembling hands, reading lungs, punching out air in disbelief. Bree continued, voice steady, unwavering. "This," she said, tapping the evidence, "is the truth your family buried. A truth your board tried to hide. A truth that almost cost James his life." She locked eyes with the man responsible. "And I am the one who uncovered it." Silence crashed over the room like a storm finally breaking. His eldest brother sputtered, trying to deny it, but the evidence was irrefutable. Bree had obtained it through the same network that once protected her when she ran from home. The same loyal shadows Duke Targaryen had placed around her since childhood. She wasn't just a runaway, or a bride, or a pawn. She was the heiress of the nation's strongest bank, and she had just saved the Stark Empire from corruption scandal and collapse. James looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time and falling harder than he intended. His father finally found his voice thick with something like shame. "We owe you an apology." His mother stepped forward next, her cold composure cracking just enough to reveal sincerity. "You protected our son," she whispered, "and our legacy." She bowed her head. "Welcome to the family." The words hit Bree unexpectedly hard. Acceptance had never mattered to her. She'd built her identity without needing anyone's approval. But hearing them now in this house of judgment and legacy struck something deep. She exhaled shakily. But before she could respond, James took her hand again, pulling her close in one smooth motion. "You don't need their approval," he murmured into her hair. "But they will never disrespect you again." Bree pressed a hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. "I don't need their acceptance," she whispered. "I just need you." His arms wrapped around her, strong and sure. "You have me," he breathed, "always." And for the first time since she walked into that cold, intimidating estate, Bree felt warmth bloom inside her. Not because the Stark family finally accepted her, but because she had faced the storm alone, brilliant, unshaken, and emerged as the woman they could never afford to lose. Not just James's wife, but the mind that had saved their dynasty. And as the room slowly shifted from hostility to reluctant admiration, Bree realized something powerful. She hadn't just been chosen. She had chosen this life too. And with James beside her, his loyalty burning brighter than every chandelier above them, she knew the battles ahead wouldn't break them. They would bind them. Forever. The world had never witnessed a wedding like this. Not in New York. Not in Los Angeles. Not even among the ultra-elite enclaves where billionaires built palaces just to outshine each other. The wedding of Brianna Targaryen and James Stark, heir to Stark Capital, wasn't simply an event. It was the merging of two empires, the uniting of two relentless bloodlines, and the culmination of a love story fate had insisted on writing itself. Journalists called it the Royal Wall Street Wedding, though neither the Targaryens nor the Starks possessed royal titles. They didn't need them. Their power was carved from influence, money, intelligence, and a reach that stretched beyond borders. And on the shores of Miami's private Crescent Beach, under a sky spilling gold across the water, their world stood still. The ceremony was timed perfectly with the setting sun. The air was warm but not heavy salty, and soft against Bree's glowing skin as she stepped onto the aisle of white rose petals scattered over the sand. She had chosen a gown of shimmering stardust silk fabric, woven with crystal dust, so fine it moved like liquid light, catching every glimmer of the sun's last rays. To the 200 guests seated beneath sweeping canopies of orchids and glass chandeliers, she looked otherworldly, a constellation given human form. To James, she was oxygen. She was gravity. She was the only future he had ever wanted. He stood beneath the arch of white lilies and moonlit pearls, wearing a tailored black suit that fit the breadth of his shoulders like armor. But it wasn't the suit that made him look powerful. It was the way he looked at her, absolutely undone, unguarded, as though the entire architecture of his life suddenly made sense the moment she appeared. His chest rose once sharply. Bree felt it across the distance between them, a silent pull, a magnetic force settling itself within her bones. The closer she came, the more certain she became that destiny hadn't been cruel after all. It had simply brought her through storms, so she could understand the peace waiting in his eyes. As she approached, a full squadron of Targaryen security agents positioned themselves across the beach, disguised in simple suits, but unmistakably ready. On the water, patrol boats circled like silent sentinels. Above them, helicopters controlled by Stark Aerospace drifted into formation, 5 of them moving as though choreographed by fate. And then against the glowing horizon, they aligned and released a cascade of red smoke that trailed into the shape of a heart. Guests gasped. Cameras flashed. The sky blazed with color. Bree's lips parted in surprise, but it was the look on James's face, soft, hopeful, that made her heart twist. As she reached him at last, he extended his hand. She placed hers in his palm, feeling warmth spread through her fingers to her wrist, up her arm, settling into her heartbeat with impossible calm. For a moment, they stood there simply breathing each other in. Then the officiant began to speak, but the words felt like background music compared to the quiet storm inside Bree's chest. She could hear the waves rolling against the sand. She could hear her own heart pounding. She could hear James's breath catch when he looked at her, not as a billionaire, not as a prodigy, not as an heir, but as a man in love. When it was finally time for their vows, James reached for her hands, lifting them gently as if they were something sacred. "Brianna Targaryen," he said, his voice soft but steady. "You are the most unexpected blessing life has ever thrown at me. I didn't know how much I was missing until the day you stepped into my world and turned everything sharp into something soft." His thumb brushed the back of her hand. "You've seen every part of me, the parts I show the world, and the parts I never let anyone close enough to touch. And even then you chose to stay." His voice faded into something lower, deeper. "You are the most beautiful thing fate has ever given me." Her breath trembled. His words were not grand or poetic. They were raw truth spoken by a man who had been taught to hide everything except strength. She cupped his face, feeling the faint scratch of his stubble beneath her fingers, and whispered her vow with a trembling intensity that made the nearest guests wipe their eyes. "James Stark," she murmured, "you took a heart that was cracked open and convinced it to beat again. You made me believe in loyalty when I thought betrayal was all the world had for me. You saved me. Not just that night in Miami, not just the day my past tried to kill me, but every day after, whenever you choose to stand beside me instead of ahead of me." Her hand slid down to his chest. "You healed me in ways I didn't know I needed. You are the only man who ever saw me fully, and the only man my heart has ever chosen." James's breath shuddered. Her lashes glimmered with unshed tears. And then, as if timed with perfection itself, the sun dipped beneath the horizon, lighting the sky on fire with streaks of pink and gold. When they leaned in and kissed slowly, deeply, with a tenderness that silenced the restless waves, every flash of every camera captured a moment that felt less like a wedding and more like the universe itself folding around them. The kiss lingered. It held everything they had survived and everything they hoped to build. Bree tasted salt on his lips, sea salt tears, or memory she couldn't tell. All she knew was the way he pulled her against him, was the way men hold the things they fear losing most. And she kissed him back with a certainty she had never felt before. As applause thundered across the beach, Duke David Targaryen stepped forward, placing a proud hand on his daughter's shoulder, before shaking James's hand with a respect that would make headlines. Behind them, holographic drones lit up the sky with elegant designs, constellations forming their initials, an illuminated crown for the Targaryens, an iron wolf for the Starks, and finally a symbol that had never been seen in the financial world. ST Holdings, Stark Targaryen, a new empire, the world's first $3 trillion conglomerate. The guests erupted into cheers as the symbol blazed above the water. Governors, tech titans, foreign ministers, fashion magnates, and global CEOs raised their glasses in awe. Even the ocean seemed to applaud, hurling waves that glittered like diamonds beneath the moonlight. But for Bree, none of it compared to the feel of James's fingers sliding between hers as they walked together down the aisle as husband and wife. For him, none of the helicopters, the mergers, the wealth, or the power matched the quiet certainty in her eyes when she looked at him as though he were the only star left in the night sky. Later, when the party was in full swing, violins weaving through the music, champagne flowing like golden rivers, and fireworks streaking across the heavens, James held Bree close beneath the lantern-lit palm trees. The world spun around them. Guests danced. Deals were whispered. Cameras flashed. But he had eyes only for her. "You know," he murmured, pulling her into his chest, "I spent years thinking power was the only thing worth fighting for." His lips brushed the top of her hair. "Then you walked into my life and made me realize power means nothing if I can't share it with you." She looked up at him, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. "James, I don't need your empire." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I trust you with it." Her heart warmed, melted, overflowed. "All I ever needed," she whispered, "was you." He kissed her again, slow, deep, reverent. The kind of kiss that binds a lifetime. In that moment, Bree realized something she had never allowed herself to believe she was done running. She had a place now, not because of her wealth, not because of her name, but because of the man whose heartbeat she felt beneath her palm. And James understood, perhaps for the first time, that love wasn't a weakness. It was the greatest form of strength. People would talk for years about the night the two most powerful families in America became one. They would gossip about the extravagance, the political implications, the stock market shockwaves. But none of them would ever understand that the real story wasn't about money, or mergers, or empires. It was about two souls, broken, bruised, and wandering, who found home in each other. Under the glowing Miami sky, Brianna Stark and James Stark sealed their story with a kiss that promised more than vows ever could. They weren't just the most powerful couple in America. They were soulmates, destined, unshakable, untouchable. And this beautiful, wild, breathtaking night was only the beginning, the end.